Hi all, this is Delos again. So recently I decided to make the dive into 3D printing, mainly to create some stuff for some hobbies and just other ideas that I had that needed the ability to create items. I decided to do this with the Ender 3 Pro 3D printer kit. I purchased mine through Banggood. There's actually a link below. This printer does come as a kit, so it comes in pieces and you assemble it. And so the purpose of this video was just to document some of that as some tips around that assembly process, just to hopefully help some people out, make things a little easier. This is not a pure step-by-step guide to assembly. If people do desire that or there's a need for it, please let me know in the comments and I can address that with a more thorough guide. This is more directly around issues that I ran into that didn't seem to be documented or that I just didn't understand from the documentation. There is pretty good documentation included. It's just a little confusing because there is multiple copies of manuals included. First tip is to, after you unbox everything, pay attention to the fact that there's a thumb drive included, as someone may or may not have during my assembly. It actually has the manuals on it, whereas I just went purely with the pamphlet that came with it, which actually was pretty good, but didn't have near the information that some of the ones in the thumb drive have. I've shown here a list of what documents are on the thumb drive, and then going forward, some of the screenshots I have are from various parts of those. One of the things that really threw me initially was the actual mounting of the power supply to the vertical rail. It shows it with some thumb screws or thumb type screws which didn't fit into the slots on the rail, making it a flush fit, which made me then think that the vertical Z-axis rails or rollers were going to be hitting these when they went by. It turns out, as I show in the picture here, there probably is enough clearance with them. I just found it kind of weird that the screws didn't fit into those slots. I guess if you tighten them hard enough, they might. I actually got around it another way by using some other screws and sliding them down the rails, which I don't know if I'd recommend because I'm not sure they're big enough to prevent it from vibrating loose. I tightened those screws by actually then just putting the Allen wrenches through the holes that had been drilled through the entire assembly if you had put the screws through as it shows in the directions. Just for humor, I included the video of me basically pondering this for an extended period of time. It's quite sped up. The phrase regarding some primates in a football comes to mind when you think about how I was trying to figure this out. There's a micro switch that stops the z-axis from going too low. So in other words, as the z-axis or the up and down motion comes lower, it hits this switch and turns it off before it would possibly slam into the bed or anything. The interesting part is in the pamphlet that came with it, which I used, it shows what you see on the screen where it shows a 32 millimeter positioning for this, but the actual bracket won't really allow it to go because the bracket rests on top of that horizontal rail on the bottom. The correct instructions in the thumb drive actually show this correctly. Um, again, just something that, depending on which ones you're following, might cause some confusion, but the correct one is to sit with the little knob or notch sitting on top of the horizontal rail. The next step involves putting in the screw drive for running the z-axis up and down. It basically runs on a threaded rod that turns. There is a note in the guide, the real guide, to remember to tighten the screw after you put the thumb drive in. The pamphlet didn't mention that, and somebody may or may have forgotten to do that, so just a reminder to make sure you tighten that after putting the screw drive in there. Otherwise, the screw drive may not turn correctly. The next step that threw me a bit was putting together the assembly that the extruder head mechanism rides on, and then also what controls the z-axis or runs up and down on that threaded rod. There's a couple steps that deal with this, but starting with step 6, at least in the pictures that I show from one of the guides, is it shows the belt that goes around as wrapping around and then sliding the extruder head mechanism on. If you do that, you actually end up with both ends of the belt caught on the same side of the extruder head mechanism. So what you want to do is where I drew the red arrow on the picture with the part of the belt circled, you want to leave that hanging off the end. Then you can slide your extruder head mechanism on and then actually also attach what shows as the green part with the 3 rollers on it in the picture, which is the other part that rides on the upright to control it and keep it level. If you put the green part on first, the extruder mechanism won't slide on because the spindles where the rollers are will actually hit that green mechanism. And then the one other part, which also I did before attaching the belt to the slot on the extruder head mechanism, was to put the belt tensioner on. It's just easier to get on because you have to fight a bit with the screws that hold it to make sure that you have the brackets correct in the slot. Otherwise, they will slide out without tightening. So the whole assembly is to put it all together, have the pulley laying out there, so the belt going out the side or the end, slide the extruder head mechanism on with its rollers, then attach the green assembly, and then attach the belt tensioner, which is in step 8. And then after you have those all on, put the pulley around the belt tensioner, and then you can slide it into the slot on the extruder head mechanism. Hopefully this makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know in the comments and I can try and do a better description or potentially do a video. Step 9 is now taking the assembly you just put together and putting it onto the two uprights that are part of the main frame. As part of this, what will happen is that threaded rod you installed earlier will slide into or go into a brass fitting, which is also threaded. This is what the threaded rod, when it turns, runs that up and down when you do your 3D print. If you get some resistance sliding that on, you want to loosen the two screws that are circled in the diagram. There's two red arrows by them, and then I circled those red arrows. Those will allow that brass fitting to slide around inside the bracket until it's lined up with the threaded rod. The whole assembly should move up and down smoothly with that rod turning as you move it up and down. And then once it is running smooth and without any binding, then you can tighten those two screws back up to hold that brass fitting in place. Again, once you're done turning, you should be able to turn that threaded rod by hand, and it should run the assembly up and down, because that's a key that it doesn't bind, otherwise it'll give you issues during printing. The next step, 10, actually shows attaching the top rail, which ties the two uprights together for stability. But then step 11 shows attaching the filament spool holder, which goes onto that top rail with the use of two of those nuts that slide into the grooves of the rail. It's actually easier to put the filament spool holder on before you attach the top rail, as then you can slide those nuts into the end and verify that they stay in the correct position while you attach the screws that hold that filament spool holder. And then after that, you can attach the top rail. So I just reversed the order of step 11 and step 10 just to make it a bit easier. For the final step, step 12, I've actually shown two different screenshots here from the two different manuals that are included. One of them has some text narration attached to it, and the other one is just purely picture images. The one that has the text, actually, it'll probably be pretty obvious, but the step counts don't match up with the images. In other words, step 4 shows attaching the white PTFE Bowden tube, which I didn't know what a Bowden tube was. Now I do, so something learned there today. It shows it as step 4, but it's actually step 5 on the pictures. The other key here is there was back on step 5 of the actual instructions, there was a step for screwing the brass fitting into the extruder head. And if you miss that step, then obviously there won't be, the Bowden tube's not going to have anything to slide into and connect to. So again, you may want to just be sure that you've got that brass fitting, and then that white tube just slides into it and doesn't really click or anything, but you'll kind of feel it seat in as it slides in. One other thing that threw me was the connection to the panel that has the knob on it. It shows it going in the EXP3. That is actually the first socket, because there's several different sockets all the same size on the back of that panel. The one that it should go into is labeled EXP3, which you kind of have to crane your head to see, or it's basically the one farthest to the left when you're facing that panel, so on the side farthest away from the knob. Again, if it's something that people run into issues with, please leave comments and I'll put a better description. Obviously, by that time you will have figured it out probably, but anyway, that'll help people. It's just a matter of kind of taking your time and looking at the pictures and following them and seeing which ones they should fit into. The picture that doesn't have the text narrative is a little bit easier because they color the items, and so it just looks a little bit better seeing it. But again, let me know if you have issues. For the most part, that completes the assembly of the printer. One or a couple other points of note. One was the power cord that came with it was a European cord. I just had to supply a UK cord for my particular instance. I don't know if they were shipping to the US, if there would be a US cord. It's just a standard computer cable, so any computer power cord will work for it. I also had some 3 blue pieces. I have no idea what they are. Hopefully, maybe somebody can say in the comments. Otherwise, I'll try and track down at some point. They don't seem to affect the function of the machine. Also, there seem to be a lot of spare screws, which I'm hoping are spares. I guess if the thing vibrates or falls apart at some point, I'll know they weren't. But from what I can see, they do appear just to be spares that are included as part of it. That concludes this video. I'll do a different one with the actual initial setup process and leveling the bed for your first print. If you did find this video helpful, please let me know. Go ahead and do a like, I guess. Also, obviously, I'm relatively new to this, so if you want to see more videos like this, you can subscribe. I'll be doing different videos as I do different hobbies and the different things I was intending to do with this machine. Also, just showing some of the prints as I go. So, thank you for watching.